Good evening. I'll call to order the March 8th, 2021 City Council Workshop and call upon Kristen Rush.
Mayor Williams.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Miller.
Here.
Councilmember Piper.
Here.
Councilmember Ford.
Here.
Councilmember Jones.
Here.
Councilmember Marriott.
Here.
Councilmember Simpson.
Here.
We have two workshops tonight. The first one's on the Old Town street closures. Mr. Devon.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I believe John Ferruzzi is going to lead us off. I'm sorry, Ryan Chelsea is going to lead us off. Thank you.
Good evening, Mayor and City Council. Thanks for having us tonight. John Ferruzzi and I will be co-presenting tonight, and we're going to be talking about the Old Town street closures. Can we pull up the slideshow, please? And we can go to the next slide. So as we all recall and are still living, about this time last year is when we started moving into a new era of social engagement, social distancing, and those types of things. And one of the largest challenges was how that affected our business community, including the community in Old Town. And so in response to what was going on with the pandemic and the social distancing and needing to be outside, if you could go back one slide, sorry, yep. If we could go back one slide, relatively early on in the process, we determined that one of the ways that we could best support Old Town, and we actually had this bleed over into other parts in the city, but we'll talk about Old Town and specifically tonight. We wanted to move forward with the Old Town street closures and allow a little bit more social distancing and people to still be able to engage and be outdoors. The map that you see here on the right is our original iteration where we talked about where the design would be, where the closures were going to be, and our initial closure date was June 12th of last year, and we expected that to go through Labor Day, so that was September 6th. And then, things continued to go the way that they did, and so we extended it a little bit further, and that got us until November 3rd, and then we finally got to a point where we said, well, we need to go a little bit further because things hadn't changed as much as we all had hoped it would, and so the new extension was until March 31st, so later on this month. However, we're fairly confident, and based on feedback that we get tonight, that we'll need to extend that even further just because those the reasons for those measures haven't gone away yet. Next slide, please. So as we look at this, a reason why we would extend the closures in this current state is the COVID restrictions aren't necessarily going away anytime soon. We're not exactly sure when those are going to go away, and they could be here for the rest of 2021. We hope not, but we'll see what happens there. So that, as a result of that, we'd like to allow for the maintaining the social distancing that we've been able to see in Old Town. In addition to just the fact that we may need the extra space in Old Town with the closures, we've been able to do some survey work and ask the question, have people liked the closures? And the BID was able to do a survey in the fall of last year, and they surveyed over 1,000 people, 1,100 or so, and overwhelmingly, there was overwhelming support through their survey instrument. About 90% of the people said that they either loved it or liked it, and that 88% of those people said that this should be something that we consider to be full-time. So we want to bring forward some concepts with you. Now, the challenge when we originally did this, it was supposed to be for the summer. And so we did it in a temporary kind of almost state of emergency. And so the way that we designed it was with what we had on hand, jersey barriers, type 3 barricades. And while it was effective, it's not particularly attractive. And if we are going to commit to this for a longer period of time, I think that we really need to make the investments in the Old Town that it deserves and kind of marry up a proposal that will allow us to then take the time and be a little bit more thoughtful about the long-term approach and where we're going to. So tonight, what we're going to talk about, and what John is going to highlight here in a second, is that right now we consider ourselves kind of in a temporary phase. But what we want to do is move from a temporary phase to what we're calling a semi-permanent phase. And we'll go into a little bit more detail about that. In fact, go to the next slide, please. We're going into this semi-permanent phase, and we're considering this semi-permanent phase up to 5 years. And the reason why we're throwing that name or that number out is because there's a lot of things that we're going to need to consider. I don't necessarily think it'll take 5 years to come up with that plan, but it may take 5 years to kind of understand all the nuance, do some infrastructure improvements that may be needed, come up with the cost and those types of things. So moving from a temporary to a semi-permanent, it allows us to study the impacts of the city infrastructure, address the public safety concerns about street closures and how those works, understand the design layout and the design and layout in the semi-permanent and the costs. But when we move from perhaps a semi-permanent to a more permanent, there's additional community input that we're going to absolutely need to have. We're trying to do this in a relatively short period of time, although there'll be some community input. Different design layout and considerations that are not necessarily on the table today because there are some limitations of what we can do today because we don't want to make significant changes to the infrastructure that are down there. But if we study it a little bit more, we may be willing to make some of those changes. And then also overall public safety considerations about things like access for fire protection, but then limiting access so that pedestrians feel more secure in the area. So I'm going to turn it over to John, and John's going to talk a little bit about where we are today in the temporary state, give you some visuals related to that, and then some visuals about where we're going with the semi-permanent, so you can get some pictures of what we're talking about, and then we'll get into some more details about where we're going. Go ahead.
Thank you, Ryan. Mayor, members of council, hello, good to see you. Next slide, please. So the concept of having a street closure in Old Town has something that has been discussed by the Transportation Committee even prior to the actual closure. And we had been actually considering some ideas around this as soon as the Gold Line had opened and the area was naturally lending itself to pedestrian connectivity and various pedestrian issues in the area. Part of the effort that we had initiated in 2019 was lighter, quicker, cheaper, trying to get out there as fast as possible with some treatments to try to implement certain things while we work towards the ultimate goal. So kind of an incremental approach. And in doing so, when COVID hit, obviously the street closures were necessary, and we took the same kind of approach to the closures in Old Town. So in this particular visualization that we've created in 2020, in fact, we took basically what is Grandview Avenue and Old Wadsworth, looking north on Old Wadsworth, and created a visualization of essentially what a lighter, quicker, cheaper solution would look like. These are basically placing tables and chairs and street furniture behind barricades and really doing what we might do during a weekend closure, for example. And in this particular example, just like you might have seen today, the double yellow center line is visible down the center of the road, or the signs, for parking, for example, or wayfinding to the garage and different things are still there. And it still looks and feels like a roadway. However, we also then wanted to visualize what it might look like if we took it a step further from a temporary to a semi-permanent. Next slide, please. In this particular example, which again, it's a visualization of the same road, we basically try to make it look and feel more like a place than a roadway. And in doing so, as you can see, the double yellow line has been removed. There are no traffic signs or markings for any of the parking spaces or wayfinding or anything like that along the roadway. And some of the features, such as creating a canvas for art or bringing the businesses into the street, has really been emphasized. And while there's nothing that has been reconstructed per se, or nothing has really been underground, nothing has been touched or gone through any kind of construction process, really it's been, in a sense, made to look and feel like a place where people can linger. And that's really been the point of looking at this from a temporary perspective versus a semi-permanent perspective. Next slide, please. So with our current closure aesthetics, we have applied, as part of that quick response, again, what would be similar to a weekend closure. And therefore, we have traffic construction style barricades, the orange type signs and the concrete barricades, and really what we might use in a construction zone. And the signs that, the messages on these signs that come with them are road closed or street closed, and really that the area is closed. Next slide, please. Even on the approach to these areas that are open, but trying to basically catch motorists ahead of time, the signs continue to read road closed and street closed. And this is what we're trying to now look at and really try to figure out, okay, what message is this sending to people approaching Old Town? Is it inviting? And it's really not. And that's really what we're trying to target with our approach. Next slide, please. In the current state of the sidewalks in the street continue to be separate spaces. And the sidewalks are basically part of the barricades and the orange signs and the same kind of construction style approach with what has been placed out there as an immediate response. But really, they don't provide the pleasant place that a street closure versus a pedestrian mall would introduce to a street closure. Next slide, please. And when it comes to protections for pedestrians, much like what we might consider for a roadway, there's a level of service for vehicular traffic, clearing areas, and how people feel. It's basically married to delay and that kind of thing. Well, for pedestrians and cyclists, there's a level of stress analysis. And that has to do with basically the amount of risk someone perceives while they're in an area that is closed off. When you have signs that are easily moved or cones that are easily moved, people possibly mixing with vehicles on the street, this basically does not create the level of stress that you'd want for a pedestrian mall. It's not a relaxed environment. The current state is a quick approach to provide the space necessary for COVID response, but it still feels risky and therefore it doesn't have the inviting look and feel that it should. Next slide, please. So what we've done essentially is developed a layout that I'm going to walk you through with basically 2 slides, 2 graphics. This section of Old Wadsworth is between 57th Avenue and Grant Place. And in this particular area, you'll see that there are a number of dash lines. The dash lines along the sidewalks basically refer to the existing ADA routes that are established with the infrastructure in Old Town, which is very pedestrian friendly. There's lighting, there are ramps for pedestrians to get on and off the curb, there are areas to cross the intersection, and so on. And then the dashed line down the middle of the roadway is a clear zone, and that is for emergency response, such as ambulance or fire trucks that may need to get to an emergency. The areas that are highlighted with the red dots denote tables and are measured to ensure social distancing. And at the same time, everything is an extension of the sidewalk on what would be like a patio coming into the street area in a modular sense. So everything that we're talking about here is a modular type of patio that would get attached onto the curb and extend that curb and the sidewalk into the street. At the intersections to this particular area, currently we have the barricades, the concrete barricades or the orange barricades that you've seen in Old Town. And again, they are not particularly inviting. What we're going for in the concept here is basically to create visually to allow drivers to see down the roadway, to see the storefronts in the street, but at the same time have a barrier, a physical barrier that wouldn't allow someone to be able to just drive right in. Where if, for example, a cone got moved or knocked by the wind or something along those lines, that mistake could happen. So this is more of an approach where it'd be creating gateways visually into the area, but also guiding drivers away from a closed area just for pedestrians. In the next slide, the same concept is applying to Old Wadsworth and Grandview, where the current closures are. So again, the red dots denote the tables along what is basically a patio extension of the sidewalk, and the intersections serve as gateways visually into the area, separating pedestrians, inviting pedestrians from drivers, guiding drivers away from the area.
Quick question.
Yes.
Actually, on the previous slide, the 57, at the top near Grant Place, it shows pink arrows into Steve's Meat Market and Rylanders.
Yes. Yeah.
Were you going to get there?
I appreciate it. No. So actually, what we're trying to do there is accommodate the businesses that have access requirements. And in the current state of the closures, that access is maintained for the two businesses that have alleyway or drive-through type of access. And what we've done is we've basically tried to separate out drivers that are just going to those destinations from the general drivers into Old Town right at Grant Place. And once they reach Rylanders, basically the area is then closed behind it. So there is a minor amount of access just to those businesses through this particular closure.
So a vehicle could drive in just through that area and then out the backside.
Correct,
Okay.
correct. Like a one-way entrance and
Yep.
kind of loop. Yes.
Okay, thank you. That's what I thought, but I wanted to make sure.
Yeah, thank you. Did you want to add anything? Okay. All right, so next slide, please. Yeah, so in this case, in this particular example, same concept as the previous one, same closure area, bringing out the patios to the street, visually communicating that with drivers, approaching the intersections. And the exception here is the driveway at the bank. We need to still be able to loop people through their driveway into the parking lot and have essentially identified the same kind of setup as today, but with different material that would still continue to be tactile material, however, more visually appeasing than concrete barricades, for example. Next slide. So to give you an example of the type of modular design that we're talking about here, I have a few pictures or examples of what that looks like. And essentially, they could be a number of different materials. They could be as decorative as, for example, the top right corner of the slide with more of a patterned type of look and feel consistent with what's on the sidewalks. Or it could be more like what you see on the bottom left of the slide, where you see a modular section, essentially blocks, that assemble together and create a barrier for drivers not to be able to go into an area. And these materials, these designs basically are conceptual at the moment, and we're working to basically identify what is the best treatment for Old Town currently through the design process to bring something modular to a table that fits the character of Old Town, but also has the functionality that we need for police and fire and maintenance type needs. So people who are trying to work in the area can basically drive over them, but the general public would be prohibited from entering. So trying to use different tactile touches to this particular design. Next slide, please. So here are some examples, for example, of planters or ballers that we're considering to go along with these modular medians that would, again, provide the gateway effect, something more inviting. They'd be designed just to allow for emergency access or maintenance access. Anything that might be, for example, in the way might be something that collapses or can be hit by a vehicle because it's a plastic type of material, and wouldn't create a problem basically for access for emergencies. However, it would not be inviting to the general public to be able to use this. Next slide, please. And similarly for the areas in between the intersections, we're considering taking an approach that is also modular and would be able to provide the extension of the sidewalk into the street that gives the storefront or the frontage of each store an area that they can operate in. And the furniture and the look and feel would be consistent with what you would expect from a pedestrian mall. That there would be some level of visual uniformity in the area. However, it would also provide opportunity for the businesses to be able to provide their, customize some of their needs, and we would be able to accommodate through the design process some of their advertising and different things that they would want to go within the context of this particular design.
Great. Ms. Miller has a question.
Thank you, sir. These are fantastic, by the way. I love them. So my only question is, how soon can you get it done? Yeah, as I was looking through this last night, you know, I love, you know, the planter boxes, and I'm like, if we get it done now, we can plant flowers in there. For April, we can really start to have some blossoming. I love that, the wooden, I mean, I may be getting ahead of myself here, but this is gorgeous, and I, you know, I'm one of those people that don't go to Old Town because of this, the orange signs. I'm like, closed. If somebody says, let's meet at Smokin' Fins, which is one of my favorite restaurants in Arvada, I'm like, let's wait till springtime or something like that, because I just don't. I would come down here for this, even though it's blocked the exact same way. It's a mindset, and it looks different and feels different. This is inviting, and I love it. So how soon can we get it done?
So I'll start with the design part of this, and I'll hand it over to Ryan to speak to the rest. On the design front, what we have currently is the concept. And part of this is to be able to help communicate what we're trying to do and get feedback and input in the process. But also, you know, some of the partitions and the furniture and different things, I think that needs to be sorted out as we move forward through the design. So what we're aiming for is by the end of this month to have a 15% design of the medians and the parklets and different things. And by the middle of April, we would basically have a 30% design that we can take from a design to a build at that point. Do you want to speak to that?
So John's correct. We're in the middle of designing these medians. There's a lot of stakeholders that have different interests. So the fire department, the police department, our utilities team that need to get back trucks in there from time to time, and so on and so forth. But the medians are our priority because that is what is really visually disturbing right now with the road closed signs and those types of things. However, our next step that we want to move into is the patios and the parklets and those types of things. The caveat that I'm going to put in there is we want to move as fast as we can relative to as fast as the businesses want us to go. So this is going to be a somewhat iterative process in talking to the businesses, understanding what their needs. Do they want a parklet? Do they want a patio? What kind of furniture do they want? Do they want nothing? Those types of things. So that's issue number one. Issue number two is the design that you see here is kind of our midterm design that we want to get to as quickly as possible. However, that midterm is kind of like post-COVID. So there could be things that restaurants are, for example, using the sidewalk now. And in the long term, we don't want them to use the sidewalk because of our ADA and other considerations. However, right now, they might look at it as a disadvantage if we were to go in and remove some of their tables off the sidewalk and install these things. So we need to talk to the businesses, and we need to understand what are their immediate needs for the short term, meaning kind of while we're still in COVID, and work with them. So some businesses might say, great, I want to go straight to the parklet, or I want to go straight to the patio, and because they're modular, we're hoping that we can install them sooner rather than later. But there could be other businesses that choose to delay the installation of their assets because that they feel that in the long term it's what the appropriate thing is, but in the short term they're trying to maximize their outside space, and so they don't want to go as fast as perhaps we would like to go.
Okay, Ms. Simpson?
Thank you. I was actually going to hold this until the next slide, but since we're jumping in here, I'm going to jump in here. I love the parklets. I think they're adorable. Next slide, so the
You
people
can do
following
next
along can
slide.
see it. Yeah, so I adore these. I've spoken with several business owners in Old Town. One of the things I hear in particular from those that are not included in the closures part is that they feel kind of left out. Those that are past Cheapskates on Grandview on the east side and really north of kind of starting around La Dolce Vita. Are the parklets going to be available to them? Because my personal opinion on this is with our beautiful parking garage, I am more than happy to sacrifice a handful of parking spaces if it means we can amplify and encourage that foot traffic past the road closures.
So I appreciate the question, and I think in the medium term that is certainly part of the global conversation that we want to have. I think that when we move from a semi-permanent to a permanent state, we are going to need to analyze what is the appropriate use of this type of material and what is the actual appropriate closure. Because when we move from a semi-permanent to permanent, this may not be the design. If we move from a semi-permanent to a permanent, this may not be the design that we want. We could look at one-way streets, for example. We could look at extending it in other areas. But until we fully understand the infrastructure that we're talking about, what other things, traffic patterns and those types of things, it's hard to answer that question. I can tell you that from a operational standpoint, that internally we've had some concerns about using the parklets outside of closure areas because of how narrow the streets are and about how close of an interaction vehicle to parklet issues could occur. And so I think that would be something that we would need to specifically address if we were going to allow the parklets outside of the closure area. And it's something that we're committed to talking about. It's just not something that we're prepared to rush into right now because of the extra factors. So we're certainly aware of those ideas and want to accommodate as quickly as we can. We're just not doing it with this plan yet. Do you have anything to add to that?
I have another quick question. So in the areas you are closed, how wide are we talking about these patios to be? Just the parking space, just that, or are you going to go a little further out?
Yeah, so just talking to the fire department and using AutoTurn to basically do the analysis around the size of their truck, entering, leaving, and that kind of thing. We are maintaining the distances that they're providing. It's about 18 to 20 feet, depending on which part of the street we're talking about. So basically, we're talking about the spaces that are within the parking spaces, unless, in for example, the section of Old Wadsworth between Grant and 57th, we've managed to shift things in front of the businesses further out into the street, and then on the parking on the opposite side gets eliminated because there are no buildings fronting it. So we've maintained that 20 feet, the 20 feet that they need for access, but shifted it around to provide more space where the businesses are needing it the most.
So, well, I mean, I'd be more than happy to call a fire district, but I don't know why their fire truck who drives down it all the time needs the full width of both lanes, both directions. We should probably revisit that with them to be more realistic of what can they safely maneuver versus taking the entire road? I mean, that's what they're saying. Because those are each 10-foot lanes, right, on both sides, maybe even less.
Yes, they're about 10
So
feet.
why close the road if I'm not going to maximize the opportunity? So maybe you can revisit that with them and be more realistic than keeping the whole road open to them.
Yeah, yeah. Part of the consideration that we're moving forward with is if we're doing things incrementally. And this includes from the fire department perspective, the traffic perspective, the maintenance perspective, and all the different perspectives that are at the table. So if something is basically successful and we can then take it to the ultimate, kind of goals, they have some information about buildings that can be retrofitted, that they can then allow for lesser space on the street as a result of retrofits to buildings. So some of this is kind of being put in the long-term bucket of things to look at, but in the current incremental state from going from temporary to semi-permanent, we're trying to be sensitive to both.
Well, you're going to take away some space from what they use today. So just realize you're taking away from the business to have access today.
Mm-hmm.
Granted, that's temporary and they could move things if a truck had to come through, but let's try to find a better approach than just giving them the entire road. Just because of hopefully they don't go down very often, but if they have to, it's very rare. So, if they can get away with 15 feet maybe versus 20, that might be a good approach.
Yeah.
And
Perhaps this would be a topic for discussion
I think we need
at
to
the
take
next
coordinating
coordinating
committee.
meeting.
I'll bring it up because if these restaurants are to survive and we truly want to embrace what's being proposed, we're kind of playing with it, but we're not doing it. So if these businesses count on butts and chairs and how many tables are filled, every square foot we give them is revenue to keep them alive a little longer. And I'm thinking COVID now, and maybe even post, that's fine. So I would encourage, but I'll bring it up in the coordinating committee like the mayor said. The other thing is Louisville does it every year for how many years? And they take away all their on-street parking and they still allow two-way traffic down there. I would think that I get what I'm hearing you guys to just do it in the closed area and do these real tiny baby steps, which I appreciate. But I remember when I first got elected, I wanted these streets closed, and I had a business in Old Town, and I was a HODA president, and I'm glad we're finally having the conversation. But these little tiny steps towards, I don't know. I just feel like we're taking too much time to worry about everyone's opinions first. And I mean, get the businesses, get the right, but I don't want us to go and build these patios and then say, oh, well, we can widen those now, and then I just wasted money building them this size, and I'm going to build them this size. So I just think let's think a little broader, as well as outside of the closed area where I was leading to was the parklets, or whatever they're called, parklets. Even if I'm thinking, are we going to take away Grandview Grill's outdoor patio? Do they come out a little bit onto the street? I mean, they don't. They're all on the sidewalk. I can't tell now that they put everything up on it. But those type of, even if they take away a few, I don't think it's a bad thing that those businesses there can participate with even the closed areas. So let's be a little considerate of all the businesses, because I'd like to see more than 10 cars in our parking garage would be awesome. So if we can get people into that parking garage and then actually using it and then getting up there and using and patronizing, that would be awesome. So I'll get off my horse. I know you guys probably are done hearing, but I think we're being too conservative on that approach.
Mr. Marriott, you want to pile on?
Yeah, I'm going to assume we're kind of done with the presentation because I just have comments at the conclusion of it.
We got a couple more.
There's a couple more slides, but generally we're going to get to the costs.
Okay, so let me just make my comments. And so I want to start off by saying how what a great job the city did last year and particularly the city staff in coming up with this on the spur of the moment, under the gun, with businesses being closed and needing to reopen, and doing it. I think it's incredible, and I think Arvada led the city and the nation in kind of executing this, and particularly looking back at the last year, the very few minor problems, if there were any, which I didn't even hear about any, shows how right you got it. And so, first of all, I want to start off by being as complimentary as possible, because I think that's a pretty incredible thing that government did, number one, that it can move that fast and be that effective, and particularly then you guys who did all that. With that, I have a couple comments about kind of this plan or about this in general, and I will echo my colleague, Mr. Pfeiffer. I agree with him on most of these points. I think initially here, while we're still under COVID restrictions, the most important thing as we move towards doing this is that we don't take capacity away from any of the businesses that need the extra capacity. And so while I know we want to have the sidewalks be the ADA route or the ADA corridor, and maybe they kind of are now, maybe they aren't, but that we don't sacrifice business capacity to get that right away. Because in my view, the restrictions due to COVID are coming to an end in a relatively short time, particularly when we're talking about a 3 to 5 year plan here. I don't see those COVID restrictions lasting that long, so that we can do parts of this as it makes sense, and particularly that we protect those businesses as we do this. So I want to start with that. But I want to go to the parklets like Mr. Pfeiffer was talking about, and particularly the places that are outside of the closure. I couldn't agree with him more about how important that is. And I think about, like, where the Bluegrass is, or that part of Grandview east of Webster, that they're operating now with a little enclosure on the sidewalk, and they're making the absolute best of it. And again, I'll give them huge credit for doing that. If they got 10 inches of space, that's significant. I mean, if they got 3 feet, it's even better. And if they got 5 feet, it's even better. And I understand the balance between safety, public safety, where there's two-way traffic, and then we've got people in close proximity to that. But I don't think that's a new thing at all. Bob mentioned Louisville. They do that. They've been doing it for years. I think it's common. I've seen it lots of other places. I've seen it on way busier roads. I mean, it's on 38th Avenue in Wheat Ridge, which carries 10 times the traffic at higher speeds. And so it's doable. So I wouldn't want us to just completely default to, we can't take any, taking risk is maybe the wrong term, but that we can't be, a little deeper into the envelope there on some of that stuff. And I would encourage you guys, the staff, as you work towards this thing, to don't hesitate to have us on council help you with some of that stuff. In other words, I wouldn't want you to feel like if there's any risk to be taken, that it's purely on you guys. I think these are decisions that need to be made by everybody who has a stake down there, which is the business owners, it's the residents who live there, it's the visitors to there. Everybody's got stake there, and I think that's kind of our job, is to represent all those stakes. And so I would really like to see us, for those businesses that are outside the closure, be able to do something. Like I said, even if it's a parklet that only sticks out a foot. When I was there this week, a foot would be significant. It changes the thing, and there's some balance there between how far it can go and how much risk there actually is. And I would agree with both Bob and Lauren. Sacrificing the parallel parking there along there is not a problem to me when we've got a parking garage right there. So it's just a matter of how much of that can we safely use to improve their lot as well. And so on that same vein, I would bring up, in addition to that, some of the alleys, or some of the space in the alleys, and I particularly think of New Image Brewing Company, or the Seltzer Company, that are actually, they face on Yukon, but their backyard, so to speak, the closest they can get to participating in this is in that alley, that we make sure we include that as part of this plan. And if this plan ends up being aesthetic improvements like planter boxes and things like that, that we go ahead and stretch a little bit and make sure we include those folks in that too. And same with if it's furniture or umbrellas or any of that kind of stuff that we think not just between the closures, but between the closures and outside the closures for some of that thing. And then one last thing I would say is, one of the things I picked out on one of these renderings right off the bat that I think is to me the neatest feature, and I love it everywhere you see it, especially Larimer Square and other places, but is the string lights overhead. I think those just make such a place, particularly at night. And that we make sure that we do that, we take advantage of that fully, even the spot where the bank pull-through needs to be, that we need to come up with some way of erecting some poles there or something so that we can make that string lighting kind of continuity and continuous through there. And then maybe hold enough of them back to help put the same kind of look or branding, you know, in the alleys, in the places where people are using the alleys as their backyard, and maybe even over the sidewalks in the places outside the closures further east on Grandview or something, to just try to tie it all together, not make it just a closure, but make it a closure and more. But overall, like, I'm really impressed, and I think you're right on the right path here. And I know in my job representing or being the liaison with the bid, they're very pleased with the collaboration that they're getting, the work that you guys are doing. I think they're all looking forward to it. And then from my neighbors, who we spend lots of time in Old Town, they couldn't be more pleased about it. And I've heard nothing but positive things about both this type of plan, or, you know, this type of approach, as well as what you've done from all the residents who patronize Old Town. So thanks for all that.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
I think Mr. Jones's wife has just had a great deal of pleasure at the
Saved the
comment about
marriage.
the lights.
You saved a marriage. Thank you.
Miss
John
Simpson.
said it a lot better than I did, but I agree with what John said. I should have let him talk first. I went straight to the juggler, I guess, on my part. But I have to say that that's all I've heard is positive, so I should have added me too. I get positive response. I'm just anxious for it to happen like Dot. I like to see us move forward. I like to see it happen. It's needed. It's been needed. And it's creating such a totally different placemaking, as some of us have said for a long time. I mean, Old Town's always had a place, but this is taking it to the next level. And so we're all chomping at the bit. So don't take my let's do this as being so firm, but it's more of I'm just like Dot. Let's just get it going as soon as we can.
I am. I heard it's going to be done by April.
Appreciate that.
If
Oh,
we can
April
play back,
15th.
I heard it was going to be done by mid-April. And lots of people, I'm looking it up right now, are moving to smaller fire apparatus. Okay, departments. So maybe when you talk to the fire department in your meeting, even the fire apparatus magazine.com, and then Bloomberg had this article of the U.S. Department of Transportation on behalf of the National Association of City Transportation Officials. They're going to small fire trucks.
Okay. Ms. Simpson, dutifully.
This is what I get for pushing my button. I get to wait. Okay. Again, I'm just like these guys. We're so excited. You guys have done an awesome job. I've heard nothing but overwhelmingly positive feedback from the community. People proactively bringing it up, saying, "Can we please make this permanent? When are we making it permanent? Like, we want to know more." And I've been telling them we're collecting the data, but there's a lot of excitement. And so we love it. And then the only thing, just building off Mr. Marriott's comments, which I agree with, and Mr. Pfeiffer's about the alleyway, is just an idea I've had was signage. Like, how do we move people through to get them to know that, like, the Seltzery and the brewery are back there on that backside, but also flights, which is just slightly removed in kind of that tail end. So how do we move people who maybe come to visit, getting off the G line and aren't aware that we have this amazing winery shop, and for those watching, if you haven't been to Flights, you got to go. I love it. And so, not to put in a personal plug there, but I really like that place. So so how do we move people through consistent signage? I don't think that would likely be too much of a significant cost burden, and it could be a way of attracting people past just the road closures to those other amazing businesses that we have that just happen to be outside of the closures.
Good. Ms. Ford, did you have anything?
Yes, I did, Mayor. Thank you very much.
You bet.
Ryan, first of all, I wanted to thank you for the fact that you're looking at this from the long-term approach. And one of the things that I thought about, too, just like Councilmember Simpson and Marriott, is the effect on the Grandview businesses. Because when you see the actual on the design, you see that actual, I don't know the name that you're giving it again, the median, or on Webster there, it looks like there's, excuse me, somewhat of a closing off of Grandview. So one of the things that I would like to suggest is we look at it as a comprehensive design. So, you know, we know we're putting in the trolley way down to the east. You know, we do have a number of businesses there. How do we really increase that walking that, you know, I've heard so much about since I've been on council? And how do we ensure that people know that there's lots more down on Grandview than from Webster? So one of the things that I thought about is I'd like us to think about what our objectives are in closing the streets. Is it simply to expand the ability for restaurants? Are there other objectives in closing the streets? One of the other questions, and I think you've mentioned this, is, you know, and again, this relates to that question of what the objectives are. You know, what are the uses going to be after COVID? Will there be changes in uses after COVID? So I think we should really think about that in terms of our long-term planning. Definitely, we need to survey the businesses, and, you know, we know, and you know, we're all excited about having open spaces. I don't think anyone wouldn't be. And, you know, as far as the parklets and everything, all that stuff is great. But I really think that we do have to find out, you know, what our businesses are thinking about this. Then another question I thought of too is, in terms of the long-term planning, would we be looking to change our zoning? Would we be looking to say, you know, maybe, you know, like other cities where they require retail on the bottom, office space on the top, to increase the activity that's happening in Old Town? So that's another thing. I had a comment sent to me while the presentation was going on, and that is in terms of people with disabilities. Are we thinking about possibly having some small form of transportation like golf carts or something like that that would enable people with disabilities to have greater access? The other thing is, I think it would be helpful to quantify what our benefits are going to be in terms of looking at cost, the cost of doing this, and what is it truly going to add more economic development or purchasing, however you want to say that. One other thing I wanted to say is that I hope as a city that we're thinking, as we're looking at creating this consistent look to our areas, that we think about our recycling cans. I know that for me, and I'm sure I speak for many people like me who like recycling, one of the things that I look at when I walk or go into a new city is, what are their values? What are they doing about their waste? That was something that impressed me when I went to a very small town, Buena Vista, in Colorado, for a holiday. I love the idea of lights too. I too, like Councilmember Marriott, think lights are very, very create a wonderful atmosphere. And then the other question that I had, the last question that I have is, have we had public safety issues resulted from the current closures? So that's something that, you know, either you want to answer now or later on, that's fine.
The answer to the question related specifically to public safety?
Yes,
Yes.
if we've had public safety issues from the current closures that we've had, has the closure caused any issues with public safety?
So I will want to get the police officers involved or the PD involved just to answer that more completely. I'm aware of specific anecdotal kind of nuanced stories or those types of things, but I would be remiss to talk about any trends or analysis. The core team and the boots on the ground and those folks are going to be able to really understand. I certainly know that we've had issues with people like illegally parking that's made dangerous situations. I know that with some of the propane tanks and heaters and tents that we've had some individuals actually sleeping in some of the tents in some cases and using the propane. So there have been issues related to that. I know that there have been some issues with the electrical system there, and that the restaurant's using the electrical systems that are in the tree crates that in one case had a little bit of an issue. So there have been some minor things that I'm aware of, but holistically, to answer your question, I would like to follow up with the PD and talk about that from a more systemic perspective. So we can get you that information.
Yeah, I think that'd be great for the future. Thanks.
Right. Okay, you've got a couple more slides. And Mr. Jones, do you want to go, Mr. Jones first? And then
I just have a question, and it's probably not something that you can address, but just something to put on the to-do list is, in this semi-permanent closure, especially for the restaurants, how do we think about the delivery, or not the deliveries to the restaurant, but those that are coming to pick up food orders to take to residents? Where will those happen? Are there the alleys exchanged, access for that, those kinds of things? That you probably already have thought through, but just want to make sure.
Well, we do have some pickup zones and some loading zones and those types of things that we'll be able to utilize, which is part of the overall scheme and something that goes on now. So we'll try to maintain that and look at the most advantageous area for that. In terms of the slide, I think there's a couple that we really want to hit on. One is the cost, because we want to make sure that everybody's excited and we want this to happen, but it doesn't come free. And so Brian Archer would certainly want me to focus on it. If you can go to the next slide, Kevin, that's okay. Yeah. Do you have some points here? Do you want to make them or? Okay, so just to make sure that we're all eyes wide open and what we're talking about here, while this is a semi-permanent state and it's intended to be able to invest in it in an incremental level so that we're not getting into the potential millions of dollars that it may talk about when you go to that permanent state, and we can talk about that in a second. This does come with a price tag, and there are different component pieces there that you can see. So right now, based on the design that you've seen tonight, we're at about $1.1 million. And then as we add things outside of the closure area or in addition to the closure area, that obviously extends the cost a little bit. So we're not 100% confident what the scope of that might be and look like, but we're certainly hearing you, and we will go back and we will do the best we can to expand that to the level, but that is just going to increase the number.
Two thoughts. I've got Lorraine Anderson in my head saying any city manager worth his salt is easily able to find $1 million. So we have that aspect, and it's looking like there's going to be another round of CARES dollars.
It does look that way.
And this is the perfect kind of project for that. Mr. Marriott?
Yeah, and I was just going to comment on that side. In my back of the napkin math, it needs to generate in total the whole area about $35,000 a month in extra retail sales of restaurant food or retail or anything to pay for itself over time. That's based on, of course, a few assumptions, but given the number and variety of businesses there, I think we achieve that. I think that gets achieved very easily. So I would look at this as an investment more than an expenditure, and a pretty good bet on an investment. So.
Great. Ms. Simpson?
Thank you. I agree entirely with the mayor and Mr. Marriott. I think this is an investment that pays for itself, and moreover, it's sort of the next step of Old Town's future, of keeping it fresh, of keeping it vibrant, of keeping the heart of our city, a beating heart in our city. And I think it's just the logical next step that we take. And my only other thoughts are that this investment be made as repurposable as possible for when we do look to making this permanent, that we don't just rip it out, that we're able to move it or keep it as it is. And then just to Ms. Ford's points about the trash bins, I can't believe I missed that one earlier, just the addition of recycling and likely even composting bins into Old Town, I think that would be really great, because particularly at the restaurants you walk, there's a lot of food waste, so I think it would just make a lot of sense to be able to have those separate. I know Denver does that in a lot of their parks, and it works quite well, so.
Ms. Miller?
Thanks, sir. So I think this is fantastic. I agree with all points. What I wanted to add was, as we talk about the phases and implementation, and you guys know that I'm like, March what, April what, and write it down. So, but one thing that we could do is implement some of these things that are less costly even before the design is done. For example, changing out the Jersey barriers and the road closed with those planters aren't incredibly expensive, and murals on the street. Those two things alone would change the aesthetics immensely for that springtime rush of people wanting to be outside in Old Town. And I think while it's still closed, if we did some things that were aesthetically pleasing now, it would bring even more people into Old Town and create a buzz and create a hype to pay off that investment before we even made it.
So we certainly appreciate the enthusiasm, and we hear you loud and clear. There is no question that you want us to do this, and we understand it, and the price tag doesn't make you nervous, although, you know, we'll talk to Brian and check his pulse, because I'm sure he's watching at home.
He's not here, so
yeah,
it
he's
doesn't
not, well, he should have been here.
He's already sent text messages to Laura and I.
Okay.
I'm
yeah.
right here.
All right, well,
I'm listening.
he's listening.
He's listening.
Reel him in, reel him in.
All right. So, Brian, I'm trying, but, you know, it's 7-1 here, people. All right, so with that, I do want to lay out the expectations, because I hear a number of things, all very good points. We don't want to spend money twice. The modular approach is something that John and his team have come up with. I think it's great because we can do it, you know, we can install now and then we can have that for the future, so that's great. Part of the design with the medians, we need to do that, and there's still some technical aspects that we need to meet for the fire department, for the police department, and even our utilities department and those types of things. So the design part of this is critical in order to get right, so that we don't install something that then we can't use because of that. So while I hear you loud and clear, and we'll do the best we can as quickly as we can, we also have to make sure that we're meeting all these operational needs, and there are so many people that we're talking to. But we're engaged, all the design work has already begun. We have a team that's ready and able and is going to step forward with that. I guess the last thing I want to close on is that I'm also hearing that everybody's, you know, comfortable with the idea of this as being semi-permanent for 5 years and those types of things, but when can we go to, you know, full-on permanent and those types of things? And just to daylight, and this is the last slide with some of the concepts, but I'm going to get in a little bit more detail for you, is some of the concepts that we need to do is we need to understand what the traffic flow is going to be like with this structure, so that we can understand those types of things. We need to study the underground utilities in and around Old Town, because it's very possible that we may at one point in time move to, say, bollards that move up and down and go into the underground infrastructure. But we have to move water pipes and sewer pipes and those types of things before that. And so not only is that costly, but we have to do that analysis and study. In order to have barricades at both ends at all times, that the fire truck doesn't even need to go down, because we've removed the need for a fire lane, we have to potentially sprinkle all the buildings. So we need to do a fire analysis of all the buildings. So all of these things are absolutely doable, and things that we are planning on doing, but they're just not doable in order to get to this. These are the compromises and the decisions that we've made with the extended team in order to move as quickly as we can in this period of time. And as we make further decisions and as we get more information, we can make incremental increases to all the things that you're talking about. The lights, for example, we all want the lights. Mrs. Jones, we're getting the lights. However, there are some issues related to the height of the lights and trucks going down, and they need to be at a certain height. So that's one thing to consider. And then the overall electricity is another. So again, it may not be a day one, but it is certainly we hear you loud and clear.
Just by day 10.
Yes, thank you all for your thoughts.
Hey,
Yeah,
Dot and I can go paint the street. You want to go paint the street? We can at least do that.
All right.
We're free labor.
I've lost you. We hear you loud and clear. We're going, unless there's anything else. Thank you.
We will move as fast as we possibly can.
Good. That would be best. You know, I have often said that one of the positives that have come out of COVID is indeed moving us more rapidly on this whole discussion of street closures. And so that's been a positive aspect. And, you know, I think there was a school of thought of, oh, you'll never be able to do that. And then I certainly remember harking back to a day where we couldn't do the parade in Old Town because of public safety issues. And now I think we've gotten past that. So I think this is great work by everybody. And you obviously have a city council that's going to urge you to keep the effort moving forward as quickly as reasonably practical. Okay?
Understood.
Got it.
Thank you for your time.
You bet.
Thank you very much.
Okay, Mr. Devon, let's move on to the easy topic now.
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Trash hauling.
Members of the council, Lori Gillis will give us an update and discussion regarding waste hauling.
Thank you. Members of council, tonight with me on the call is going to be our waste hauling core team and Emily Grogg from the city attorney's office. I am going to fly through the first 4 slides before handing off to Rachel Kuroiwa. So first slide, next slide. All familiar with the benefits of waste hauling. The reason why I've included these slides is these are key messages that we want to keep out in setting expectation and responding to calls. Next slide, please. You're very aware of the milestones that are coming up right now. We are in the middle of that first milestones where cart selection cards are going out to our residents. So our calls are going up, and your calls are likely going up as well. So be mindful that we're aware of that. We just want to keep you with us as we go through this. Make sure you know that the team is there to respond to your questions, and Republic is also collaborating closely with us as this call volume is starting to elevate. Next slide, please. Service levels, familiar with those, but those are at the front of this deck so that you and our community can see those as well. Next slide, please. Again, the implementation milestones that are internal to the city and what's coming up again. Highlight right now, we're at that cart selection period where these calls are coming in. And as we move through this, we're going to keep you informed of data and where things are standing and what we're hearing from our residents. Next slide, I will hand off to Rachel Kay to talk about what's going out to the community. This is what triggers the calls to you and things you need to be aware of. Rachel?
Can you speak up a little bit, or can we get a volume adjustment? Okay. You're just soft-spoken.
I am. I'll try to speak up.
Great.
So I'm going to cover the listed topics on this slide. The first topic is updated FAQs. We have updated the FAQ document on our waste hauling webpage. We look at the calls and emails that we receive each week for revisions to the FAQs. So you'll notice if you look at them, there's a revision date. So when we put a new question in, we'll have a new revision date, so they'll keep those fresh. If we can go to the next slide, please. I will talk about our service level selection call to action. So I had this slide at the last update. This gives you an idea of how we've been communicating about the service level selection opportunity to choose how people want to participate in the program. If we can go to the next slide, please. This is the service level selection postcard. This is the moment of choice for our residents. These postcards started to be mailed the end of last week. They're being mailed in phases so that by service day, and that's so that we don't overwhelm the website where people can make their choices or the phone line. We want to make sure that people have good customer service and can get through when they're ready to make their selection. So between last week and March 18th, batches of postcards will go out, and then residents will have until April 16th to make their decision.
I have a question on this.
Yeah.
So is this the actual postcard?
The postcard itself is bigger and has more text on it. This is the actual selection part where you put in your selection. But the residents receive more information with this.
So is there any logos that represent Arvada?
Yes.
Can
It's
I
on
see a
the
sample
front.
of what you're sending? Because if it's coming out just like this, it's probably why you're getting an influx, but I'd like to see what the Arvada information is associated with this postcard.
We'll do that, we'll send it your way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because we should have had our logo on that card as well, right next to that name.
All right, can we move to the next slide, please? We are sharing graphics and messages on social media to reinforce that service level selection is starting and also the benefits of the program.
Yes, Ms. Miller?
Sorry, you have a chatty bunch up here. You're doing a great job. And I think this all looks fantastic. One thing I just wanted to comment on this slide is, as you may or may not know, some of the calls that we're getting aren't as excited about this service as everybody else is. And so there are some negative feelings out there towards this program. And when I looked at this, when I looked at these graphics, the tone in which I looked at them, and I think I was looking at them after I took a call from somebody that wasn't excited about this. And to me, it's like, did you know? Did you know? Check your mailbox. I was reading it negatively with the word you and your in a different color. So that was the only thing I just wanted to throw out as a suggestion. And I think it was because I took the call and then I saw these. And so I just wanted to throw that out as just a thought and nothing else. And you don't even have to change it. It was what I saw when I read it.
Thank you.
Mr. Jones?
Just a point of clarification, are these being mailed to every household? And the reason why I ask is because there are some of the houses may be long-term rentals. And so is that mailing going to the property owner or to the house?
But yeah, go ahead, Lori.
Well, I also see Jason want to jump in there, and I'm going to say both, as far as depending on where that water bill goes.
Right.
Some of those are coming in right now as far as they've gone to both, and so we're having that discussion. Jason, do you want to correct me?
Oh, that's correct. They
Okay.
go both to the landlord and to the property, the service address.
Okay, that's what I was hoping
Okay.
the answer would be. Thank you.
Lori, I have a question. On the HOA residents, are they receiving the postcards for cart selection?
So Nancy, and let me say that depends. They are not if the HOA has provided a copy of their contract and they are opting out. For HOAs that have not who have opted out, the residents will be receiving information about how the program works and what will be billed to their HOA. So where HOAs handle trash collection and have those contracts, they've opted out, residents within the HOA will receive information that speaks to the 88 cents that will show up on their utility bill.
Is there anything on the postcards that say something about HOA members not being affected by the program?
I can't speak to exactly what's on that information, Nancy. I'll look to one of my teammates.
And I guess the reason why I'm asking that question is if it would if there's anything on the card that would produce confusion for HOA members that would cause them to think that they're not involved in the program. So you may not be able to answer it now. That would be just a general question, just to check to make sure that we don't have anything that would be conflicting in message.
Okay,
Want me to answer?
sure.
So we are working on the postcard this week and we'll be printing it. But that
You
is-
are?
Yes.
Okay, good. And then while we're on the postcards, going back to and I know you haven't gotten there yet, but while we're on the postcards, with the landlord-tenant situation, I think we made the decision at some point to send it to the address. But if and you're aware because I sent this person to you, if that for some landlords, they pay for the waste hauling collection. Very interesting, didn't think about it from that standpoint, but the one landlord that I was talking to had made the comment that, when she got into renting, that it was suggested that she pay the waste hauling because at one time she didn't, and it wound up being a problem. So for some landlords then who are not located at that resident, how are we going to make sure that they do get that information? If they're currently paying for the tenants' waste hauling services.
Ms. Ford, that is, we have talked through that, and that is why we're sending to both the property owner and the tenant, and suggesting that they work through this together as far as who makes the decision. That opportunity has presented itself a few times since the cards have gone out, and it is working as was planned because we have it both ways. Some landlords pay, some tenants pay, so we're sorting through that on a case-by-case basis. Both have received the information.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much.
Okay, next.
Okay, I just want to mention one more thing that we're using to make sure people have information about cart selection is we created a very short explainer video that demonstrates the different cart sizes and gives information on how people can find more information about the service, and it has a call to action. Can we switch to the next slide, please? Our next major milestone for communication after cart selection will be cart and service rollout. During this, we will talk about how to use the service, what's recyclable, where to put the carts, what time to have them out. So that'll be a fun time, hopefully to get people excited about the new service and their carts. Next slide, please. We wanted to update you on what we're hearing, sort of broad themes. Again, it hasn't changed too much since our last meeting with you. We are hearing more from people with sort of less common situations, so vacation homes. We've talked about landlord-tenant situations that we are navigating through as a team, and then doing outreach activities like sending a letter to landlords, updating FAQs when some of these situations that we haven't encountered yet go from being sort of a one-off to something that we think rises to the level of a FAQ. We are still answering routine questions on the phone, email, all the ways that people can contact us. If we can move to the next slide, please. We still do hear people who are opposed to the program, sharing their thoughts and about the program with us. And then we've also heard about the customer service transition to Republic, and we'll talk more about that in a later slide. But that's been something we've navigated over the past few weeks. If we can go to the next slide, please.
Mr. Jones, did you have another question, or did I?
I do, but I'm not sure if, so let me ask the question, and if we're not there yet, I can wait. But with regard to the vacation holds, I know that that was something, and I don't know if this is going to be talked about later in the presentation, so I'll wait if, is now good?
We are going to talk about it.
I'll wait until we get there, because you may answer my question.
Thank you. So I want to talk about branding. At our last meeting, we heard that there's a need to brand the program. So I'm going to talk through the work that we've done on branding and then show a couple of options. Next slide, please. Through giving waste and recycling services a brand, we want to express city ownership of the program, increase transparency, and then create an identity for a complex program. How we've approached this is that we re-engaged with what the city is trying to achieve by offering this service. So increased recycling rates, reduced truck traffic and air pollution, giving people lower prices. So all the benefits of the service. We engaged in a process of co-creation with stakeholders where we shared ideas, we shared concepts and things that we're thinking with different groups of stakeholders and received feedback and really tried to fold it into different directions that we've taken with branding. And from these conversations and explorations, we've developed two possible approaches to branding this program. Next slide, please. So option A would be to start a program with its own, with a new brand identity. So again, connecting with the aspirations of the program, and then creating something that's expansive enough that we can include future services like curbside recycling. So the phrase that we have for option A is resource recovery. Option B would
Rachel, excuse me, you said something about curbside recycling. Are you talking about composting? When
Yes,
you say offering
yeah.
in the future, because we
Yes.
are providing the curbside recycling.
I'm sorry, I misspoke. I
That's
meant
okay.
curbside compost.
Just want to make
Thank
sure we
you.
were accurate.
Yeah, this program includes recycling. So for option B would be to place the program under an updated but existing brand identity. This gives the city an opportunity to refresh an existing brand and then place waste and recycling services within the context of other sustainability efforts of the city. And that brand would be Sustain Arvada. Next slide, please. This is what the two approaches could look like. So we have a Sustain Arvada, waste and recycling services, and then resource recovery, waste and recycling services.
I struggled a little bit with the resource recovery. It reminded me too much of if a computer crashes and you're trying to recover the information, but that was just me.
Thank you. Can we move to the next slide, please? And I'll show some of the graphic elements that we're considering for this brand. So this circular graphic, it references the familiar recycling triangle, but also speaks to the idea of a circular economy where materials are recovered and then reused for new purposes. And they don't just go to the waste fill. We have the Arvada A front and center, showing the city's ownership of the program. If we can move to the next slide. These are our two options with color put together, how they could appear. So we have option A, resource recovery, which is starting the waste and recycling program with a new brand identity. And then Sustain Arvada is option B, where we're placing waste and recycling services under an existing brand for the city, and then exploring what that means in context with other sustainability programs within the city. So my question is, which approach do you find more compelling as the identity of this service?
Mr. Marriott.
Can I vote for neither? So the and here's what I would tell you. I think the tagging it with something called resource recovery, I agree with the mayor, is too. It doesn't say to me that this is who picks up your trash at the curb at all. And I think the Sustain Arvada is probably not the right name either. I think government should be clear, simple, easy to understand. These are kind of the approaches you would take if you're really putting a sell on somebody. You want to make them feel a certain way to encourage them to take a certain action. And I don't know that that's government's place. You might call it Arvada solid waste pickup, or there's other things, but I wouldn't do either of these. I would be more direct, more simple, easy to understand. Someone who's never been to our community before ought to see a flyer, see a bill, see anything and know what it is. And neither of these say that to me.
Mr. Fiver.
So I'm going to agree with John as well. I think neither works for me. And let me back all the way up to this branding thing, because I've said this a few times, and I'm not sure, I hate repeating, but I think we're not grabbing what I'm saying here. When you start mixing in Republic into a city-owned program, there's confusion of who's selling what. And so the phone calls I get is, I hate Republic. I hate Republic. Well, Republic at the end of the day is an agent, a vendor of our program. We should be saying this is the City of Arvada's waste services program, and stop pulling them in and their branding and their newsletters. I've noticed in the newsletters, they have all their branding. And so this is causing confusion. And so the hell we're dealing with on some of these questions is the fact that we're not saying this is a city program. We're just saying, well, Republic, you're doing it. So I'd like to know more about maybe the contract. Maybe I missed something in the contract, but I didn't know that they were supposed to be able to put their logos on everything. And then on this, when you look at this, it should be as simple as our logo, City of Arvada, Waste Services or whatever. Just say City of Arvada. It should be that simple, because we're adding so much more confusion. We're having a hard enough time trying to make sure people understand what this is all about. We say it's a city program, but call Republic. Oh wait, it's a city program, but Republic sends the mailers out. Where are we with that part? Because I brought that up several times about Stop the Republic.
I have heard you, and I do understand what you're saying.
It's still happening though.
I do.
Even on the presentation.
Yes. As far as trying to bring in Arvada's brand, recognizing that the City of Republic will be driving those trucks and doing the services, we're working internally with our communication experts and the outside parties to help with the sense making and how to carry this name. So I do hear you, and I'm going to take it back again. Please don't think that we're not hearing you or not listening or ignore it just because we're not changing it exactly as far as how you're identifying it. I'm not sure that there's an agreement with how you're specifying how you want it that will reach the public in the way that you expect it to. So I want to take it back. I'm not arguing with you. I will take it back.
And I appreciate that. It's just at the end of the day, is it or is it not a city program?
The city has a contract with Republic to provide the service. Yes.
They provide the service, but it's a city program. The city owns the program. We have contracted it out to a company to pick up the trash and recycling.
I hear you.
Okay.
Well, and the reality is, at some point in time, it may not be Republic.
Right, and then
You know,
we're going to go
because it's
through
gonna
this
get
whole thing
rebid.
again, and now we're going to have waste management all over all these things, and now people are going to be like, what the hell? I thought I was with the city, with Republic, and now I'm with somebody else.
We're being really mindful of that on the carts and all those pieces. We're also trying to roll out a program that people know who they're going to contact right now as we take this out for first step. I hear you. I'll go back. I'll bring back why it doesn't look how you see it, how you think it should look, if it doesn't.
But if they call the number and they're calling Republic, they're actually calling our number, 720-898, right, number, right? It's a city prefix, and they're answering the phone. I thought they were supposed to answer the phone how? How are they answering the phone over there?
Republic Services.
So they are.
I'm going to confirm that, but yes.
Okay, I thought they were supposed to say something a little bit closer to, so that people don't get confused on they're calling a city number and then Republic's picking up the phone. I thought there was some branding there as well, because I remember bringing that up as well.
Okay.
It just, we're not hitting on the cylinders to get this thing off right. And it's just frustrating because I'm the one who gets the phone calls all the time when people are confused. I'm sure you all do too. Don't get it wrong. You're getting them as well. But the most recently, ones have disturbed me a little bit, and it just becomes difficult to explain all of that when they're confused on what we're trying to tell them. So
Okay.
I hear you. You got it back.
And I'm not ignoring, I'm seeing if there's any
Yeah.
disagreement information.
And I would say no way on either one of these. You
Okay.
just need to stick with the simple City of Arvada brand on the side of the cart, and just don't even go there right now. That's just my vote.
Ms. Miller?
Well, I'm going to disagree with my counterparts here because I love the Sustain Arvada logo and I love what it says and it's nice. And I think adding something besides waste and recycling on the cart, it's cool. I like it. My 2 cents.
Ms. Simpson?
So if I'm going to pick from these two, I'm going to go with Sustain Arvada. I tend to agree. Neither one just hits me with joy, and I'm like, yes, that's the branding I want to see. But that said, if I'm going to pick, I'm definitely going to go with Sustain Arvada. But yeah, it could be just as simple as, waste and recycling, waste be gone. Ironically, WAR, W-A-R, Arvada, waste and recycling. At least on social media, it's war. But nonetheless, yeah, I credit to the team. I know a lot of work's gone into this, and I agree with Mr. Pfeiffer that there has been a lot of pushback against somebody who had a negative experience with Republic, and I just want to keep reminding to the public there are some very, very significant and stringent and effective service mandates built into this contract. It is not like this is a private hauler who is going to have you buy a cancellation fee and you're stuck. There's a lot of guarantees built into this, and the staff worked very hard on making sure that happens. And this will be open in the future for competitive bids. So in the future, it may not be Republic, and if they don't do their jobs well, it won't be Republic. And so that's just something I hope all residents will keep in mind. This is indeed a city program, and so I agree the branding needs to be City of Arvada first and foremost. If I had picked between these two, Sustain Arvada gets my vote.
Thanks.
Mr. Jones?
Yeah, not to pile on, but I didn't like either one of them either. John and Bob said it succinctly. Again, I think this is the City of Arvada program, and we stick with the branding that's already attached to the city. So I'll leave it at that with everything else that's been said. But we've gone through a pretty extensive process in rebranding just the Arvada logo and all that's been associated with that. I think stick with the brand that's already there.
Ms. Ford, did you want to chime in on this one?
Certainly, Mayor. I always like to chime in. I would agree in that both of them don't excite me either. However, and I like the idea of continuing the logo of City of Arvada, because in most cities, waste and recycling services are under the umbrella of utilities. And so when a lot of people, I understand that a lot of our older residents who are used to this current service that we have, it's confusing for them because they see it as their choice. But in many communities, because waste hauling falls under the umbrella of the city utilities, I do think that we should keep the City of Arvada. However, since we have a Sustain Arvada program or committee here, and we've looked at that logo for Arvada, I don't see why we can't incorporate both Sustain Arvada as a mantra, if you will, with the City of Arvada logo. I think you could have both. I do want to comment on what Bob and Lauren have mentioned, because I just recently today had a phone call in relation to that 720 number, and my constituent felt like they were duped. And unfortunately, because it said you're calling the city number, but it wasn't, it was Republic Services. And so again, I think that that is problematic in terms of the branding of this service, because people, it's confusing to them because so many people are making decisions, I think, based on the hauler instead of the program. And I know that to be true because they're telling me, yes, I love the concept of the program, I just don't like the hauler. And so I do think that that is a problem for us in terms of branding, because people are looking at the hauler instead of the service. And with that, I'd also like to make a statement that this constituent who called me today, this was in relation to the blue paper that came out with the water bill. When he called the 720 number, he wound up waiting 22 minutes. And so that got me thinking, I couldn't remember whether our contract mentioned what the expectation is in terms of calling the service line. And if it doesn't mention that, what is our expectation for service? Just like we do with the trains, you know, we say that most consumers won't take a train if it's more than a 15 or 20 minute wait. I forget which number it is, but same thing here. At what point will people get frustrated calling this number and go back to thinking about poor service that they had in a different lifetime with Republic Service? So I really think that we have to straighten that out as well with Republic. And that's my comments.
Okay,
on
thank
that.
you, thank you. Yeah, I'm not loving either one of these, but would like to go with something more consistent with what others have suggested. Okay, and I'm sure that makes you all real happy because you wanted to come in here and us just say, God, that looks great, let's do it. And Ms. Miller did, but
We had no expectation of that. That is why we come here. This is a big project, a big program, and that's why we want to run things by you. So, and I
That's-
mean that respectfully. Your input, your feedback, and your direction is why we're here.
right.
So,
Good.
okay, going forward,
And we're not going to shoot the messenger, so.
I'm owning this. We got it. So let's go on to logistics. We have transferred that customer service line, which is part of the problem and what you're hearing about. They are bringing up a program to answer the phones and be responsive, and it is not without challenges. It's not without challenges in finding staffing, but we are working with Republic. They are working with us. When we get those longer calls, if you get us that phone number, we are able to follow up and actually understand what went on. When it's a longer wait time, right now it's going to be because the volumes are up, and some of the calls are flowing to their national phone center, which is creating problems. The good news is we're aware of the problems. The bad news is we don't have them all fixed yet, but we're working on that. Next slide, please. We are getting a lot of calls, and just to give you an idea of the volume, for 2 weeks we received over 1,000 calls related to the program. About 20% are those elevated calls, and I'm going to tell you, we either get calls of appreciation and thank you and wanting information to pure exploitives. So much like some of the calls you may be receiving, we're receiving them, Republic is receiving them. We're having conversations so that we can respond appropriately, ensure the FAQs are up to speed. Folks, not surprising, one of the top items, upset about the minimum service fee, not happy about the Republic choice, which is what you were referring to. So we're taking these items, we're updating the FAQs, we're being responsive. I think the call volume that's elevated and angry isn't as high as it could be, but we want to get it down and we want to have those discussions. And there is a certain percentage of the population that will not be happy and continues to call back with concerns.
Mr. Fiber?
So when you get those calls around the cost for extra bag, I mean, what is our normal response around that?
On the extra bags, the responses vary, but I want to tell you that we spend a lot of time with folks as far as what their options would be if, and I'm sorry to refer to residents as folks, speaking with residents about whether it makes more sense for them to have an extra card or to have the bags. So we walk through on a case-by-case basis. I've heard Jason on the phone, I've heard Debbie on the phone, very thoughtfully walking the resident through what their options might
So
be.
we do bring up it's only $4 and some
Yes.
pennies.
Oh,
really,
absolutely.
because I think that's a good way to educate, through that opportunity. I just wanted to make sure we were offering up solutions.
We are.
Versus just saying, well, that's the $3 you're going to pay.
Absolutely.
Or whatever it is. Okay.
Absolutely. Jason, do you have any more you want to add to that?
No, $4.15 for an extra can is 3 bags, so it's definitely a way better deal.
Thank you, Jason.
We're also in the hiring process. As you can see, we had a lot of applications, and we're sorting through those right now. Next slide, please. This is the landlord-tenant discussion that we talked about. We did mail those cards out to 2,600 different residents. We're working with those on a case-by-case basis because, as you can imagine, contracts aren't exactly the same for individuals, and we're getting calls. Others are just navigating through it without calling. We'll keep you posted on how that goes. But we are addressing those variances in how the agreements are set up.
Mr. Marriott.
So stay on this slide right here. So I got 13 of these in the mail last week. I think it's the letter that you're sending out to landlords. And on the FAQs, it says, the question is, I have a rental property in Arvada. Does the landlord or tenant select the service level? Where will the bill go? And the answer is the service level selection postcard will go to the service address. It is up to the landlord how to determine who selects the service level. Please communicate with your tenant. The city cannot interfere with landlord-tenant relationships. The service level postcard will begin arriving in mailboxes in March, and the selection window goes through April 16th. So it says the service selection postcard is going to go to the service address. It's also what this slide in front of us says the exact same thing.
Yes.
But I think I heard earlier Jason saying that no, the service selection postcards are going to both addresses.
We're contacting both addresses. So the landlord received the letter, the resident received the service selection postcard, and the communications are going between the two. It's the service selection postcard that has a verification code on it for the selection.
Got it.
What we're doing when the landlord calls is we have I'm just going to say a side system for when the landlord wants to change it, where we're tracking those records to change, because the landlord can change that, but the resident has the code.
Okay, so let me make a suggestion
Sure.
here. It's probably not equitable to tell landlords like me to go find 13 postcards, especially when I don't know what day those postcards are going to be sent to those tenants, and will the tenants even recognize them in the mail, or will they go in with the junk mail, or will they save them? That's probably not equitable. There probably needs to be a better way for landlords to say, I want out, or I'm okay with the tenant choosing, or whatever all those options might be. I also foresee a potential problem here that if the tenant receives the card, makes a selection and sends it in, and the landlord says, yeah, but that's not what I want to do, we've got conflict there. And certainly I don't fear conflict with my tenants, but it's tenants' expectations, are a problem there. If you were going to send the card one place or another, the card needs to go to the landlord. And if the landlord would like to distribute it to their tenant to choose, that should be the way it should go, not the other way around. I look at also what happens if a tenant returns a card saying, I want this service, and the landlord calls and says, I'm opting out, I want no service. How's the city going to, I realize, I guess you're going to come up with a way around doing that, but there's probably a better way, and it would apply not necessarily just to landlords and tenants, but all residents. And there ought to be a way to go on the website and click a button and make your selection. There ought to be a phone number you can just call and make your selection. And I realize right now our customer service utility billing people are taking calls and doing the right thing. I don't think anybody's not trying to do the right thing. But it seems like an undue burden. And frankly, this approach, it's kind of like, if I were Public Services, this is exactly the approach I would want, because it's, I won't go as far as saying it's coercive, but it's not really maybe the easiest approach here. And before, I guess I can wait a week and see if I get 13 postcards next week that I can return to make selections. Obviously, I can call our utility billing people and force my selections if I need to, but I don't think it's not probably the right customer service posture to force that situation. So my input.
And I understand what you're saying, and what I would like to respond to that on is a resident that has, or a property owner that has 13 residents, would, if they wanted to change those, would need to call in, and we do have a system in place for that. Unfortunately, through this process, there isn't a one-size-fits-all, and I'm sure some of our decisions, we're going to go, wow, we could have done that a different way, and other decisions will know that we nailed it. We're learning. We are comfortable with how we did this, and it could still be one of those decisions where we say we wish we would have done this a different direction.
Yeah, so can I just get clarity on one question then with that? Are selection postcards going to both the landlord and the tenant, or it's just going to the service address?
The postcards.
The
Card
yeah,
selections.
Says cart selection postcards. Are those going to the service address, or are those going to both the service address
They're
and the
going to the
landlord?
service address, and the letters are going to the landlord.
Okay. And a landlord can opt out by doing what?
The landlord, Jason's number is on there, and the landlord can call and change that.
Okay.
Opt out or change the card size.
Okay. So so just calling Jason's direct number is the only way for landlords to opt their properties out.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, next.
Am I still going? Okay. Next slide, please. So let's talk some numbers. Next slide, please. Just wanted to share with you where we're at related to licensing of haulers. In 2020, there were 9 haulers licensed in the city of Arvada. 7 have received, submitted their application with their recycling plan, and they are licensed. We have 1 in process, and we have 1 no longer in business. We do have some bad actors as far as some of the information that's being communicated, and we're managing that. We have offered to meet with all waste haulers that are licensed if they have questions, and one has taken us up on that, and we're working with some and others are not. So we're doing the best we can to reach out. If they comply with what's required in the licensing process, they are licensed. Next slide, please. This is just a map of the HOAs. When you look at the information on this slide, the brown areas are the HOAs that have opted out, and then the red and yellow are non-confirmed HOAs that will be eligible to be part of the program. I will tell you our strategy with HOAs has worked because an HOA that received the cards called, and they actually already have a contract, but they hadn't responded to any of our outreach yet. So that piece is working, but we have a ways to go. You'll notice that where most of the brown is out in the northwest area that have contracts with existing haulers. Next slide, please. So for some additional numbers here, just wanted to share the number of HOAs and where that is at. We had a total of 116 HOAs identified. We have 94 of them have opted out. That's 13,000 addresses which have opted out of the program offered by the city at this time. And we're picking up the others as we go through the process. 2 have joined, and then we have those 20 that are outstanding that haven't responded yet. I know we had some activity in this area today. I don't know if you have any updates you want to share, Jason, or if you want to keep going.
Well, so we have 4 of the 20 that have submitted their contracts to us, so that number is a little less now.
Jason, I have a question for you. Are we learning why HOAs are opting out? I'm wondering if one of the major reasons is because many of them are currently under contracts and would wait until they were out of their contracts before being able to sign.
Yes, you're correct. The HOAs have anywhere from 1 to 5 years on their contracts that they currently have.
Thank you, Jason.
Next slide, please. This just gives a little bit more on the eligible addresses. When we started the program, we talked about 39,000 eligible addresses, and you can see how that's breaking out right now. We did have those card selection cards sent to about 26,000 addresses. That's what will be increasing our call volume with a lot of questions. Next slide, please. So on the metro districts, I know Councilmember Pfeiffer had a lot of questions in this area. There are about 30 of them. Keep in mind that metro districts, our whole list includes certain special districts as well. 17 have finished communication, responded back to us. We've reached out to another 21, and we don't have contact information for another 9. Just working our way through this. We also know that the card selection cards are going to trigger more discussion on the metro districts.
Can I ask a question?
Mr. Pfeiffer and then Mr. Marriott.
So out of the 9, what are they? Are they like residential special districts, or are they like
No.
the fire district or something?
Yep, Highland Hills Fire District, School District.
Okay.
So
so
the reason why we don't have contact information, it's not a service they provide. We could get a hold of the fire district, but
yeah, so it's
Yeah.
not like what my worry was, which is like in Candelas, we have the
No.
Beaumont.
We
and
have
it's
those.
1,400 homes.
Right.
Yeah. Okay, so out of them, it sounds like you've gotten a hold of at least the metro districts that are residential.
yes, sir.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Marriott.
I'm going to go back just one slide, and I just want a quick clarification on the HOAs that several have opted in and a bunch have opted out because they've got current contracts. And Jason, I think, mentioned that they have 1 to 5 year contracts with their current haulers. They retain the right when those contracts are up to recontract with either that hauler or the hauler of their choice, correct?
Yes, they do.
So they don't have to opt into the city. But any new HOA that was formed today or in the future, they don't get that same privilege, right? They're required to be in the city program and are not allowed to contract
That is correct.
on their own. Okay, sounds good. I just wanted to make sure that the HOAs that currently are out retain the right to stay out in the future if they so choose.
Yes.
Does that apply with the metro districts too? So let's say, for example, like the one on 56th and Ward, 58th and Ward. They're not built yet, but that is a metro district. I'm assuming, how,
I'm going to phone a friend in the city attorney's office,
okay.
if that's okay. Emily, you out there?
Yes, it will be treated the same unless there's any other type of agreement with the city that says differently.
so even the ones that we have formed but yet haven't built homes yet could fall into this program, or would fall into this program?
Yes.
Correct, unless their agreement with the city says differently.
And we'd have it on those because we weren't, okay, thanks.
Okay, good. Next slide, please. So, as we're discovering tonight, and we continue to discover on a daily basis, not all the questions are answered. Every day something comes in that we work through and make the right decision for the resident, but also make sure we're interpreting the ordinance in the proper way. So we're going to talk about some new challenges. Next slide, please. Mr. Jones, this is the question that you were asking, and this is about vacation and snowbirds and other holds related to extended absence from the home. And we have worked through this, and we have this confirmed with Republic. If somebody is out of town for over 30 days, they can put a hold, and they'll be charged 88 cents for that 30-day period or 90-day period that they're out of the city, as long as they're opted in. Okay?
Mr. Jones, you had another question?
Yeah, and so my question is, so obviously there are people that will take advantage of that, but I don't think that when people go snowbirds that leave their home, they're not discontinuing their water service. Do we have fees that are associated, like, for instance, for water, is there a basic fee that everybody's being charged?
There's an admin fee. Jason?
Yes, the service charge for the water bill, for the water meter is being charged.
Okay, so it's possible that on that bill that month, they're gonna have just their water meter charge and the 88 cents?
Yes, sir.
Okay. I wanted to make sure that there was some continuity, because if they were getting a bill for 88 cents, it's probably gonna cost more to send that bill out than 88 cents, just from the handling perspective, so.
Thank goodness for electronic billing.
Yep. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Marriott?
So I just wanted to make a comment on that. Excuse me, Mayor, if
You
I'm
bet.
interrupting.
Nope.
Lori, I think it's very generous on the part of the city to do that. On the water bill, they do pay the minimum water amount, correct? When person goes on vacation, whether they're living there or not, they're still paying the minimum water amount that we have under the city program, correct?
Service charge fee only though. So that would be maybe you might be referring to sewer, the sewer-based charge? I don't know for sure.
Well, you'll have to pardon me because I'm in an HOA, so I don't get a water bill. But if I were a resident and I get the basic water service, right, which is a certain number of gallons, that fee, that continues, doesn't it? Whether you still get charged the basic water service fee and amount of gallons that the minimum, right? You still get charged that whether you're in your house or not, on vacation or not.
No. So we have a $5.83 for bi-monthly billing fee. That's for the water service, for the meter. You only have to pay for the gallons you use.
Wow, that's terrific. Because other cities don't do it that way. They charge you for the minimum amount of water. And so that's a deal. I don't think our Arvadans know that they have a good deal there.
Mr. Marriott.
Yeah, just a quick question on the vacation snowbird hold. Is there a limitation on that? Or can someone say, put it on hold till I contact you next?
I'm going to look to Jason on how we've set that up.
Yeah, it's for however long you need it to be. So if you're going to do 3 months or 6 months, it is for that until you come back and take up residence again or come back for your vacation.
Okay. And does that hold for houses that are vacant? Like, for instance, if you're going to do a year-long rehab on a house, you can put it on vacation hold and you're not charged the opt-out fee. You're charged just the 88 cents, but you're not charged $5 a month.
Correct.
Okay. Thank you.
And there you can see some of the navigating that we have ahead.
So let's be careful through that because he just set up a way to work around the system, but let's just.
Well aware.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just wanted to make sure it was blunt.
Yeah. No, thank you.
Okay.
Next.
Okay, so just re-emphasizing carry-out services available upon request with a resident with a physical inability to bring in their containers. That's part of our agreement. Just wanted to put that out there again to clarify. You saw this, I'm sorry, next slide, please. This I was going to talk a little bit relative to some of the discussions that you had earlier, so I'm just going to skip through this. Next slide, please. So a lot of conversation as far as where we're at, and then there's conversation about Republic, and I just am sharing, and I believe I attached this link in the weekly as well, as far as recognition that Republic has received rating at the time it was looked at the Better Business Bureau rating received. And then the reminder, even without that, we have the contract to implement customer service standards, which we are ready to do. We're not in play right now as we're just bringing up the program, but we will hold Republic accountable to the contract. And let me just say that they're not worried about it because they're holding themselves accountable to the contract.
Did we publish that contract where any citizen can look at that, or at least the parts, like the service level parts?
It is public.
So they can, so somebody can go read it. And
We didn't advertise that section. If you think that's something we should be doing, or we could put more in the FAQs if you wanted us to go into more detail.
I think it would be,
Okay.
especially if we're holding them to a standard,
Okay.
it would be a lot easier for us to kind of point folks there, or if they read it, that they know that they're held to a standard because they're an agent of the cities.
We'll do that.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks.
And I just want to add that this is good information, but I think that Republic should be doing its own promotion because, again, they are contracted by us and they may not be our service provider in the future. And I don't think we should be promoting our contractor per se. I think they need to promote themselves because they're the ones that developed a poor reputation. And they really have to overcome that. And it's unfortunate because those of us whose HOA, for example, is contracted with Republic, I keep telling constituents, never had a problem. There's not been a problem with them. They've been a good company, and it's unfortunate they've developed a negative perception on people's part that I think is untrue.
And thank you for that feedback, and my intent wasn't as much on promotion as to be responsible related to customer service standards and statements that have been made that Republic has an F rating. I was trying to track that down.
Yeah, and I think that's very important because of that perception, Lori, so thanks.
Okay. As we have shared, we'll do the deployment of the carts from Arvada High School. I'm sorry, next slide, please. I'm reading off my screen. We'll be at Arvada High School, and we're working on logistics there. Next slide, please. We are still working on this. We do not have the logistics in play. We do have 2 tours set up. We're looking at facilities. We're working to ensure that we're able to recycle as much as possible and provide opportunities for our residents. So that is still in play. We have not solved that problem yet. We know we need to get that landed pretty quickly. So next slide, please. Next slide, please. Wanted to share some additional clarification just to make sure that you have this information, although you're aware. According to the agreement, there will be no rate increases for 2 years. That is in the agreement, and that is set. So in reference to the 3.5% potential increase in rates, those rates will not increase for 2 years. They're set. Next bullet, there is a 2-year price guarantee by Republic, and they are here regardless of how many people opt in or participate in the program. And then we also talking about the management of recycling carts and customer service. It is a top priority, and we're working on that in the customer service for our residents. And there's work to do. The good thing about all this is our communications are impactful. We're hearing from folks because they're seeing the information. Unfortunately, some are seeing it for the first time, so there's some more questions. As much as you are hearing information from our citizens that some may be more vocal or have more concerns, there are also residents that are appreciative of the information, and there's some celebration of having the program in the city. So from what I've heard from you tonight, next steps, please. We'll continue on the path that we're on. Need to make sure that we are fully responsive to comments made by council, especially related to the branding. Need to talk to the team about what our strategy will be there as far as timeline and implementation, and that may be something that is set down to ensure the program is implemented. And we'll work on that. And with that, I believe I've covered everything. I want to ask the team if I missed anything critical that they want to make sure was conveyed this evening. Okay, I got a thumbs up from Jason. So I would ask if there's any more questions and how we can further your direction.
Mr. Fiver.
Look, I know it's a heavy lift. This is a journey that we're all going through right now, and I appreciate everything you're all doing. So I think there's some good ways of making it a little easier on all of us. So hopefully some of these areas you can kind of find an opportunity to improve on. And we're also fumbling through something that is uncharted. I think there's a few of us on council that come from communities that had organized trash hauling. So, you know, it seems maybe more blunt to be, oh, this should be easy. It's municipal trash. That's what happens in 90% of the United States. But I understand here it's not. So we just need to kind of persevere through it, and I understand it's heavy lift. And I know, Jason, you're taking most of the hits, and I appreciate your fortitude on the matter and all your customer service, because I hear that you handle them with care and glove, and that's what I hope Republic does when people call in too, that they could be mirrored like our value system when our employees talk to our citizens. So that's what I hope to glean out of all this at the end of the day. So thank you for everyone involved, and thank you, Jason and Lori and the rest of the team.
No, you're welcome, and thank you for the comments. And can I jump back with one more thing related to the cart selection card? Both brands are on there. It's not branded the way that you are suggesting this evening, and those cart selection cards are out, but we're going to take it under consideration at this point. So, pardon me?
Different on each side?
The part that was clipped onto the slide was just the, I'm just going to say the order form. The both front and
got it.
back have Arvada and Republic on the letter, and then on the front of the mailer.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Jones?
Just, sorry to digress, but back to the call center, I'm assuming that either scripting's in place or will be in place to address some of the concerns that Mr. Pfeiffer and others have discussed.
We can certainly the scripting is already in place, and we can modify that scripting, and we have a bi-weekly, we're down to weekly calls with Republic at this time. To have those discussions, we need to get that clarity in the scripting. Also recognizing Republic is bringing their customer service reps up to speed, not taking anything away from them, but it's a learning process, and they'll get better kind of as an iterative process. And as we address these challenges on the call center, we do have the ability to listen to those calls that go into these new customer service reps so that we can make correction based upon what we hear.
Yeah, I mean, and the only reason why I say that is owning a call center myself, we answer the phone on behalf of our customers all the time, and they think that's who they're calling. So I know it can be done. It's just a matter of obviously training and getting people up to speed. So hopefully that can happen sooner than later, so that folks residents really do believe that that's an extension of our team.
Very good. I see no other lights. Thank you for the presentation. And thanks to the team. I know this has been rough on everybody in terms of having to deal with angry people at times. Especially Mr. Marriott. With that, Mr. Devon, do you have anything else good for the cause?
No, Mr. Mayor, members of the council, thank you for all your feedback tonight.
You bet. We are adjourned.